Before we continue, I ask you to support our channel by liking this video and subscribing. Your participation is essential so that we can keep bringing you captivating stories like this. Emily Smith had already lost count of how many times she had woken up in that same room with the same feeling of tightness in her chest. The alarm clock no longer rang. It had been weeks since she used it, because her body already knew that the day would start early, even without a fixed commitment. The rent for the small apartment in the Bronx was once again overdue, and the doorman, always polite, no longer masked his reproachful looks. Emily tried not to get upset. She was 30, had trained in nursing, had experience, a good resume. But it seemed that New York insisted on ignoring it all. Ever since she left the last clinic where she worked, doors had been closing one after another. It wasn't for lack of trying. Interview after interview, empty promises, "We'll call you," and nothing. And yet, she continued. She forced herself to get up, to eat something, usually day-old bread with margarine, and to go out to face another day. That cloudy morning, her only hope was a single interview scheduled at a private hospital in downtown New York. Last chance of the month, she thought, with a lump in her throat. The routine of the past few months had become one of improvisations. Emily sold homemade sweets that she prepared at night to the neighborhood. She attended to an elderly gentleman who lived 3 blocks away to take his blood pressure and give him insulin twice a week. And occasionally she did temporary shifts in clinics that paid poorly and delayed payments. She always carried with her her backpack with her uniform, a folder with printed resumes, and a little bottle of coffee she prepared at home, more as psychological support than as an actual beverage to keep her awake during the commutes on public transportation. Every penny counted. Sometimes she skipped lunch to pay for her fare. Other times, she'd ask for an extra plate at her sister's pay-by-weight restaurant, who lived on the other side of the city. Emily was tired, but not defeated. She was proud of who she was, of the profession she had chosen, of the way she treated every patient. But she felt that the city, the system, and life itself were testing her endurance day after day. She took a deep breath as she left her house, closed the door carefully, the lock was always loose, and faced the gray sky that promised rain. Just for today, then it'll get better. And it was in the midst of that turbulent path that the unlikely happened. Already running late, Emily quickened her pace on the wet sidewalks of downtown. She dodged puddles, people selling umbrellas, horns honking from all directions. She clutched tightly the folder with her resumes, trying to protect it from the drizzle that began to thicken. The coffee in her thermos warmed the palm of her hand, serving more as psychological support than as a true drink. She checked her watch every 2 minutes, knowing that she wouldn't arrive on time. When she decided to run the last few meters to the subway, she slipped slightly on a part of the sidewalk and, in a second of inattention, bumped head-on into a man coming from the opposite direction. The impact was strong enough to spill the coffee. The liquid splashed directly onto his suit, which was clearly expensive. Emily froze, with her heart in her throat and the resume falling onto the wet ground. "Oh no, 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 no," she murmured, quickly crouching down. The man, elegant and serious, looked at the damage on his own clothes and then faced Emily. And there, at that common downtown intersection, her life began to change, although she did not know it yet. The man took a step back, trying to assess the damage to his jacket, while Emily remained crouched, picking up the now soggy and coffee-stained resume. "I'm so sorry, really. I swear I didn't see you. I was running because..." She tried to explain, still crouched, feeling her face flush with embarrassment. He remained silent for a few seconds, with a serious look and a tense jaw, but there was no anger there. It was as if he were dealing with 1,000 thoughts at once. He took a deep breath and said, "Don't worry, it was an accident." His voice was firm, measured, and even with the shock, there was something courteous in his tone. Emily stood up, trying to understand whether he would continue speaking or simply go his way, and it was at that precise moment that his cell phone began vibrating in the inner pocket of his jacket. He answered, turned slightly to the side, and almost immediately his expression changed completely. The ensuing conversation was quick, tense, and to the point. Emily tried to step back, thinking that the call was something too personal for her to hear, but she couldn't help overhearing. He was speaking with someone named David, and words like fall, alone, old lady, and caregiver didn't show up, filled the air. Are you sure she's okay? Is she talking? Did someone call a doctor? He paced from side to side, with the phone pressed to his ear and a lost look in his eyes. When he hung up, he stood for a few seconds, as if deciding what to do. And that was when he turned toward Emily, as if he had just remembered that she was still there. You said you're a nurse, right? He asked directly. She nodded, not quite understanding where that was going. My grandmother is home, alone. The caregiver didn't show up today. I have a meeting in 10 minutes that I can't postpone. Could you go over there, just to see how she is until I can get out of here? Emily stood frozen, surprised. Her mind flashed through all those lessons every woman learns from a young age. Don't get into a car with strangers. Don't go to unfamiliar houses. Don't trust requests that seem too good to be true. But in the face before her, even though it was clearly the face of a man accustomed to power and control, there was a very genuine expression of concern. It wasn't feigned. This was someone desperate. Just for an hour at most, he insisted, sensing her hesitation. I'll pay for the taxi. She lives nearby. There's no one else there at the moment. Emily looked at the ruined resume, then at her watch. It was already late. She thought about the interview at the hospital, about the slim chances of landing the job. She thought about what she would do if she were in his place. And without quite understanding where the answer came from, she simply said, "Okay, give me the address." The man seemed truly relieved. "Thank you so much, really. Her name is Catherine, Mrs. Catherine Brown." He was already taking his phone out of his pocket again to call a taxi. And Emily, still a bit dazed, could only think that she was entering the strangest part of her year. The taxi arrived in less than 5 minutes. Emily got into the car with her backpack on her lap and her heart racing. The address he had given her was in one of the most upscale areas of New York, and that alone made her feel a bit uneasy. It wasn't the kind of place she usually set foot in, not by a long shot. The driver, upon seeing the destination, even asked, "Are you going for an interview there?" And she replied with a simple, "Something like that," not wanting to engage in conversation. Throughout the ride, she gazed out the window with a lump in her stomach, wondering if she had just committed the biggest mistake of her life, or if, for some strange reason, she was on the right path. She tried to repeat to herself, just check on the lady, give the initial care, and then leave. But deep down, she already knew it wouldn't be so simple. The last name Brown resonated in her memory, as if it were familiar, but she couldn't quite recall from where. She was so used to hearing the names of big businessmen in the news that maybe that was it. Perhaps it was just paranoia. The only sure thing was that she had to act as a professional. After all, despite the improvisation, that was what she knew how to do: care. When she arrived, her first impression was one of astonishment. The wrought iron gate opened automatically as soon as the taxi stopped, and a guard led her to the main entrance of the house, or rather of the mansion. Emily had never seen anything of that size up close. The white facade, the columns, the immaculate gardens, all seemed straight out of a movie. The door opened before she even rang the bell, as if they had been expecting her. An employee informed her that Mrs. Catherine was in the recovery room on the second floor, and that they had already provided ice and cleared the way. Emily climbed the stairs, trying to maintain her composure, but her heart pounded so loudly that it seemed to echo down the hall. Upon entering the room, she saw a lady with immaculate white hair, attentive eyes, and a firm posture, even though she was sitting on the bed with an ice bag resting on her ankle. The first thing Mrs. Catherine said was, "You are not the caregiver." Emily replied naturally. "No, ma'am, I'm a nurse. I was called in an emergency to help." There was a second of silence, and then Mrs. Catherine gave a slight, ironic smile. "David is going crazy, really, sending a stranger here." The initial distrust didn't last long. Emily moved closer gently, asked permission, examined the ankle with care and firmness, and within minutes she had determined that the case wasn't serious but did require rest and care. While she applied the ointment and improvised a wrap using bandages she found in the house's closet, Mrs. Catherine observed her every move. "You have steady hands and the bearing of someone who has seen a lot," she said in a tone of approval. Emily wasn't sure whether to respond, but she smiled slightly. Mrs. Catherine continued, "Do you know that he is my grandson, right? That he is the director of that gigantic development company?" And that's when the surname made sense. Michael Brown, one of the richest men in the city. Emily concealed her surprise and simply responded, "I met him today, literally bumped into him." And, curiously, that made the lady laugh, a genuine laugh, with warmth. "Then he still has a sense of humor. What a miracle." From that moment on, the atmosphere changed. Mrs. Catherine seemed genuinely curious about Emily. She asked about her experience, her training, even about the neighborhood where she lived. Emily responded honestly, and perhaps it was that openness that created in that instant an unexpected connection between two women from completely different worlds. Emily could hardly hide how out of place she felt in that environment. The Brown mansion was imposing, yes, but what stood out the most was the silence. A clean, well-decorated silence, full of old paintings and polished furniture, yet carrying a strange sense of loneliness. The wide corridors had a subtle aroma of lavender and waxed wood. The floor made no noise when walked upon. Everything was perfectly organized, which contrasted brutally with Emily's small apartment, where there was always something out of place, where the refrigerator made noise at night and the hallway light flickered for months. She noticed details inadvertently: the Persian rug in the hall, the linen curtains, the vase with fresh lilies on the small table next to the room. It was a world completely different from hers, and yet it didn't seem entirely welcoming. It looked too beautiful, too cold, as if everything was there to impress and not to live in. Emily thought that if she lived there, she would even be afraid of spilling a glass of water. Mrs. Catherine, on her part, was a lively and vibrant presence in that setting. Despite her age and her injured ankle, she maintained an upright posture, a firm voice, and a gaze that seemed to see right through people. Emily noticed this within the first few minutes. She wasn't the kind of lady who enjoyed pampering or wanted to be treated as fragile. As Emily applied the elastic bandage on the swollen ankle, she heard Mrs. Catherine ask bluntly, "And why are you unemployed if you're so competent?" The question took Emily by surprise. It wasn't common for someone so important to ask so directly. "The market isn't easy, ma'am, and sometimes it seems that experience doesn't count much when you don't have a recommendation," she replied sincerely. Mrs. Catherine let out a slight and remained thoughtful for a few seconds. Then she said, almost challengingly, "You speak firmly, I like that. Most caregivers who come here seem to be afraid of me." Emily smiled timidly. "I don't know if it's courage. Maybe it's just habit. I've already cared for many strong-willed people out there." Gradually, the atmosphere between them began to change. Mrs. Catherine, despite all that air of authority, started asking more personal questions, but without being invasive, only curious. She wanted to know where Emily had studied, why she chose nursing, if she had family in the city. Emily answered everything naturally, but without exposing herself too much. She felt they were being observed and evaluated, but not with distrust, rather with interest. When the care session ended, Mrs. Catherine already had her foot up, new ice applied, medication taken, and a more relaxed expression on her face. "You have talent," Not only in what you do, but in what you convey. Confidence, she said, as Emily put away the improvised materials. Thank you, ma'am, Emily replied. You can call me Catherine. If you take care of me like you did today, you'll end up hearing a lot from me. Emily laughed, for the first time feeling that this absurd situation had become light. Strange, but light. She had no idea what would come next, but at that moment, there was something in that woman and in that unexpected encounter that made everything seem less strange and more possible. When Michael arrived, it was already nearly noon. Emily was still in the room, sitting in an armchair next to the bed, talking with Mrs. Catherine about the care that needed to be maintained in the coming hours. The sound of the front door opening and firm footsteps in the hall were enough for the lady to lift her head and say, with an almost ironic smile, "Look, my grandson finally decided to show up." Emily tensed a little. She didn't know how he would react. Shortly after, he entered the room, now without the coffee-stained jacket, with his shirt rolled up to the elbows, visibly tired. His eyes first searched for his grandmother and then met Emily's. "How is she?" he asked directly, without even waiting for a greeting. Emily stood and replied professionally, "Her ankle is swollen, but it's not serious. I immobilized it and left it with ice. She took her medication and her vital signs are stable. She just needs rest." He nodded and moved toward the grandmother. "Sorry, Grandma, I really couldn't leave." Earlier, Mrs. Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "You sent a nurse instead of a caregiver. Look how bold." Michael turned to Emily with an expression that mixed fatigue and relief. "Thank you. Really, I didn't know what to do." Emily only offered a slight smile, adjusting the strap of her backpack. She was preparing to thank him and leave when he said something unexpected. "Do you have any other commitment today?" Emily blinked, surprised. "Well, I had an interview, but after the coffee, bath and the rain, I think I've already lost that opportunity." He fell silent for a few seconds, as if analyzing the situation more deeply. "My grandmother has a regular caregiver, but she is always absent. And honestly, I think we need someone real, someone who knows what they're doing, like you. Have you ever thought about working here full-time?" Emily thought she must have misheard. "Work here, in your house?" Michael nodded. "Yes, with a contract, fixed salary, everything by the book. The only condition is that you are in the house Monday through Friday. She needs constant company." Emily looked at Catherine, who observed her with a spark of curiosity in her eyes, and for the first time in days, she felt that something new and big was opening. The proposal took her by surprise. Emily did not respond immediately. Her instinct told her to think twice. It was a world completely different from hers, with its own rules, one that she wasn't part of. At the same time, the memory of overdue rent, the empty refrigerator, and the lack of responses in her job applications weighed more than the fear of the unknown. Mrs. Catherine, noticing her dilemma, spoke in that direct tone that seemed to pierce any hesitation. "You are better than all the caregivers that have come here. If you accept, you won't be the babysitter of a grumpy old lady. You'll be someone who keeps me company, understand?" Emily laughed with a certain timidity and asked, "And if I don't fit in?" Michael replied without hesitation, "We'll do a trial period, 1 week. If you don't like it, you're free. But I really think it's worth it." Emily took a deep breath. Her mind raced, but her body said yes. "All right, I accept the trial week." Michael extended his hand, and she shook it. It was settled. Emily's first night at the Brown mansion was stranger than she had expected. After sealing the agreement, a housemaid led her to the guest room, which actually looked like a 5-star mini hotel. A huge bed, sheets that smelled of lavender, a marble bathroom, and a shower that made you forget reality for 5 minutes. But what weighed the most was the silence. A silence comfortable for some, but oppressive for someone coming from an apartment with a poorly insulated window and the street noise as part of the routine. Emily felt small in that refined space. As much as she was grateful for the opportunity, something inside her screamed that she didn't belong there. And perhaps that's why it took her so long to fall asleep that night. Because even with a safe roof and an opportunity to start over, there was an invisible burden, trying to fit into a world that had always seemed unattainable. In the following days, a routine began to form. Emily spent her mornings with Mrs. Catherine preparing breakfast together, despite the lady's constant attempts to evade her diet, and checking vital signs, medications, and light stretching exercises. In the afternoon, they took short walks in the garden, talked about life, and Emily listened to the old lady's youthful stories with genuine admiration. Catherine was more than a strong-willed woman. She had an impressive past. Trained in law at a time when few women could even enter university, she had helped lay the foundations of the Brown family empire. She recounted stories of meetings with businessmen, tough decisions, trips abroad. But now, trapped in a body that could no longer keep pace with her sharp mind, Catherine showed impatience with her limitations. "It's hell when the body lags behind the soul," she often said, and Emily tactfully managed to balance that restless spirit with the technical care that the situation demanded. In little time, they created a light and sincere routine where both respected each other and even had fun. The only point of dissonance was Michael. Although always courteous, he maintained a certain coolness in the casual encounters around the house. Emily saw him only at specific times. In the breakfast, sometimes at night, when coming or going in a hurry, he always thanked her for her work, would ask superficially how the grandmother was doing, but avoided longer conversations. It was as if he lived in a parallel world inside his own house, and curiously, Emily felt it more than she wanted to. Sometimes she would pass by him in the hallway, diverting her eyes too quickly. Other times, it seemed that he was about to start a conversation, but he halted midway. There was a subtle tension between them, not unpleasant, but strange. Emily tried to remain professional, but she wasn't immune to the fleeting glances and loaded silences. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, her body reacted, a tingling in her stomach, slight anxiety, an oddly pleasant discomfort. She didn't want to get involved, and she knew she couldn't, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to pretend that nothing was happening. What began as exchanges of bewildered glances soon turned into a silent game between Emily and Michael. He would appear at the end of the day, always after long meetings or complicated phone calls. Emily was almost always on the terrace with Mrs. Catherine, reading aloud or simply helping the lady stretch her legs. Michael would pass by, greet her with a contained "good afternoon" and leave. But there was something in that exchange. Sometimes he would pause for a few seconds to listen. Sometimes he would make a brief comment like, "That book is from my grandfather's library," or "Did you read it in college, Catherine?" Emily responded calmly, but inside she was always alert. She felt her skin warm, her heart race. And it wasn't the kind of passion from a soap opera, it was that discomfort that arises when someone touches parts of you you thought were long forgotten. They barely spoke, but when their eyes met, it seemed to linger a second longer than necessary. Small sparks in an environment that supposedly had to remain professional. One night, close to 10, Emily went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The house was silent, with only a few dim lights on in the hallways. Turning in the corridor, she found Michael sitting alone at a table with a glass of wine in his hand. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar and his gaze was lost in the glass. Emily apologized for startling him, but he only smiled sideways and made a dismissive hand gesture, as if to say, "It's all fine." "Rough day?" she asked, almost without thinking. He replied, without taking his eyes off the wine, "Every day is hard when you have to make decisions that affect a lot of people." She sat on the other side of the table, hesitant. They remained silent for a few seconds. And then he asked, "Do you like this place?" Emily replied, "The house? It's beautiful, impeccable, but very quiet. He smiled, this time more sincerely. "I think so too." That was the longest conversation they had had up to that point. Nothing extraordinary, but it was in that shared silence that they both began to understand each other without grandiose words, just by being there, trying to breathe. The following days passed with that same vague atmosphere. They exchanged short phrases, small gestures, without taking another step forward. Emily tried convincing herself that it was just her imagination, that it was a fleeting fantasy. But every time he appeared in the library during the mornings, where Mrs. Catherine read and lingered a little too long, she realized that he felt it too. One day, she caught him watching his hands while she was caring for the grandmother. He said nothing. She just noticed, and she began to avoid being alone with him. She needed to keep her clarity. She was there as a professional, and if she got emotionally involved, she would lose focus and the job. But the more she tried to distance herself, the more he seemed to be present. It was as if both were trapped in a silent dance where neither took the first step. Until the day of the storm arrived. The storm began with a distant thunder, one of those that makes the glass of the windows tremble slightly. Emily was used to the rain, but that night something was different in the air. The sky kept darkening, and the winds began to slam the windows of the main room. Mrs. Catherine, who was normally very calm, commented, "This one is here to wash the whole city." And she was right. In a few minutes, the rain poured intensely, in bursts, beating on the roof. With fury. The mansion, though solid, seemed to shudder with each thunderclap. Emily headed to the kitchen to check if the employees needed help, and it was then that the lights flickered twice before going out completely. Everything fell silent. Not even the generators had yet been activated. Emily returned upstairs with a flashlight, where Catherine was waiting on the armchair, and helped her get more comfortable. When she inquired about the generator, she heard from one of the employees that Michael had personally gone downstairs to check the problem. He always does that. He said he doesn't trust anyone who messes with that system. The minutes passed slowly. Emily felt a knot in her stomach as she gazed out the window, watching the tree branches dance in the wind, as if they were about to break off at any moment. Outside, the lightning tore across the sky, and the water streamed down the glass in angled rivulets. Until suddenly, a dry, loud noise, different from everything she had heard that night, resounded from outside the house. It was like the snap of something big breaking, followed by a muffled crash, as if something had fallen onto the concrete. Emily froze. She looked out the window, but the darkness was total. "Did you hear that?" she asked one of the employees, who only nodded with wide eyes. It could have been a branch, maybe the generator. The answer did little to soothe her. Emily felt in her stomach that something was wrong. She grabbed a stronger flashlight and, without thinking too much, put on her rubber boots and left through the side door of the mansion. The rain pelted diagonally, soaking her face in seconds. Even with the makeshift raincoat, she felt the wind pushing her back, but she continued walking, guided by her instinct. The stone path leading to the generator shed was slippery. Emily gripped the flashlight tightly, her feet sinking into puddles, and her heart pounded faster with each step. It was then that under the dim light of the emergency spotlight, she saw a silhouette lying next to a cluster of plants. She ran. It was Michael, soaked from head to toe, with one hand on his shoulder and the other attempting to brace himself on the ground. A thick branch, at least 2 meters long, lay next to him. Emily immediately crouched down. "Did you hurt yourself?" she shouted over the roar of the rain. "My shoulder. I think I twisted it or something like that," he replied, trying to hold back the pain. Emily quickly assessed the situation. There was no bleeding, but he needed to get out of there as soon as possible. "Lean on my arm. Everything will be fine. I'm with you." And even with his heavy body and the rain making every step difficult, she helped him up and guided him back to the house slowly, firmly, as she had done so many times with patients in emergencies. Back inside the house, Emily took Michael to the living room. now lit by a few emergency lamps that had come back on. With the help of a dry towel, she settled him on the sofa, asked for an ice pack, and began to examine his shoulder more calmly. His clothes were still dripping, but now the cold seemed to come from within. "You were lucky. If that branch had fallen a bit off to the side, it could have been much worse," she said while gently pressing the injured area. Michael only nodded, his eyes half closed from the pain. "I think I was foolish again, thinking I could handle everything." Emily didn't reply immediately. She immobilized his shoulder with a cloth bandage and said in a serious tone, "You should trust the people around you more." He let out a weak laugh. "It's harder than it looks." And for a few seconds, they remained in silence, exchanging glances. Him sitting, her kneeling in front, holding his arm delicately. It was that kind of silence that said much more than words. Emily tried to get up, but Michael gently took her arm. "Stay a little longer," he said in a low tone, almost as if he didn't want to hear his own voice. Emily didn't know what to say. She stayed there, kneeling for a few more seconds, then sat beside him on the rug, leaning her back against the base of the sofa. He turned his face toward her. The dim light cast dancing shadows on the ceiling, and the sound of the rain remained intense, like an inescapable backdrop. "You saved me out there, and I don't just mean today," Michael murmured. Emily swallowed hard. She felt her heart pounding in her neck. She turned her face and replied firmly, "You just need to stop thinking that you're alone." When their eyes met again, there was something different there, a mutual truth that both had been avoiding for days. He leaned in slowly, almost unwillingly, and she did not pull away. For a second, the world seemed to stop, but before that moment could fully solidify, hurried footsteps cut through the hall. An employee appeared, announcing that the power had been fully restored. The charm vanished in that instant. Michael discreetly withdrew, running his hand through his wet hair. Emily stood up without a word, adjusting her drenched blouse. "You're going to need rest. Tomorrow morning I'll take you for an exam," she said, resuming her professional tone. He nodded, silently expressing his gratitude with a look. From that moment on, a new tension arose between them, not one of uncertainty, but of awareness. Something had been revealed in that room, though it had not materialized in action, and that changed everything. Emily climbed the stairs quickly, her heart racing and her mind whirling. That night it took her hours to fall asleep, replaying that near kiss, that moment when everything could have changed. She knew she was getting involved, despite trying to avoid it. She knew that he felt it too, and she knew, above all, that that limit had been crossed, even if it was disguised as silence. The following days were strangely quiet. Michael spent more time in his office, his shoulder immobilized, avoiding any closer contact with Emily. She, too, kept her distance, focusing solely on taking care of Mrs. Catherine, trying to convince herself that that near moment during the storm meant nothing. But it was impossible to ignore it. Both knew that something had changed. It was in that atmosphere of unspoken tension that Emily began to notice small inconsistencies in Catherine's medications. Instead of the common drugs for circulation and joint pain, she found a specific combination used in cases of moderate heart failure. In that instant, her stomach dropped. She discreetly spoke with one of the house employees who helped organize the medication schedules, and she confirmed the diagnosis had been known for months. Emily felt betrayed, not by Catherine, who seemed to have accepted her condition with resignation, but by Michael. He had not told her. On the first day, when she asked about the lady's general condition, he had omitted that detail, and that bothered her more than she wanted to admit. That night, when Michael appeared in the library where Emily was reading to Mrs. Catherine, she could no longer hide her irritation. "Why didn't you tell me about the heart failure?" she asked directly as soon as Catherine went to rest. Michael sighed, as if he had been expecting that question. "Because I thought that if you knew from the start, you wouldn't accept the job, or that you would treat her differently. And I needed someone who would see my grandmother as she is, not as a clinical case. Emily shook her head. You don't trust anyone, do you? He gave a slight, sad smile. I do trust. I just have trouble showing it. And it was at that point that Emily suddenly blurted out, Is that why you thought you had the right to snoop into my life before hiring me? Michael froze. His reaction said it all. You know, he said, more surprised than remorseful. Emily continued, I found out by chance. One of the secretaries mentioned that you requested a full background. I checked before I arrived. You knew where I lived, that I had been fired, even about the credit card debt. The already heavy atmosphere grew even denser. Michael tried to explain himself. I needed to make sure you were trustworthy. I was going to place you in my grandmother's house, entrusting her care to someone I found on the street. Emily folded her arms, her eyes brimming with tears. And didn't you think that maybe I would also trust you? That this gesture, this job, meant something important to me? I felt invaded, Michael. He fell silent. For the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. Emily left the room with her heart racing. It wasn't just about the job. It was everything that had been built there. The conversations, the silences, the care, the glances, now tainted by a distrust she had not chosen. And at that moment, she began to consider a painful, but perhaps inevitable possibility: leaving. In the days following the argument, Emily kept her distance. She continued, caring for Mrs. Catherine with the same affection and professionalism, but she avoided encountering Michael whenever possible. The atmosphere in the house changed. Even Catherine noticed it without asking directly. Michael, for his part, retreated back into his office. He tried to act as if everything was normal, but his presence was tense, almost uncomfortable. Emily pretended not to care, but merely hearing his footsteps in the hall made her heart react. The problem was that there was no more. Illusion left. Everything was laid bare. The truth about the old lady's illness, the prior investigation, the avoided closeness, that near kiss. And yet, despite everything, she missed him, and she hated to admit it. It was in that confused climate that her best friend, Laura, visited her on a free afternoon. They sat in the backyard garden, and Emily poured out everything. "You're in love with him," said Laura, with the certainty of someone who knows even the silent tone of another's heart. Emily denied, hesitated, and then lowered her gaze. "I wish I wasn't." Laura was direct, as always. "And him? Does he feel something?" Emily took a deep breath. "I think so, but he doesn't allow it. He's afraid, or proud, or both." The conversation lasted almost an hour, full of pauses, advice, and shared silences. When Laura left, Emily remained seated for a while, watching the sky change colors. She already knew what she had to do, even if she didn't want to admit it. It was tearing her apart. She felt lost in something that began as a job opportunity and turned into an emotional whirlwind. She didn't want to live in the shadow of someone who didn't know how to handle what he felt. And so, that night, she wrote a resignation letter. It wasn't an impulsive act, it was necessary. She placed it in a plain envelope, left it on Michael's desk, and went up to her room with a heavy heart. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She only felt a profound silence, as if she were giving up something that had never truly been hers. The next morning, Michael found the envelope. He read the letter in silence. He didn't look for Emily. He didn't ask for explanations. And that silence, more than any words, confirmed to her that she had made the right decision. When he came down with his suitcase ready, he found Mrs. Catherine in the garden, sitting with a blanket over her legs. "Are you really leaving?" she asked bluntly. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I need to take care of myself." "Too." The lady took her hand firmly. "You were the best thing that entered this house in recent years. If he doesn't see it now, someday he will." Emily didn't know what to say. She only hugged Catherine tightly, unable to express all that she felt. Farewells are always difficult, and that one hurt in a way unlike any other, because Emily knew that even though she had gotten there by chance, she had left a part of herself in that place, in the routines, in the care, in the conversations, and, above all, in what could have been. That night, the guest room felt narrower than ever. Emily was packing the last of her belongings, trying to keep her mind occupied. She had already said goodbye to the employees, discreetly thanked them, and kept telling herself that she was doing the right thing. But her heart insisted on repeating that something was still left to happen, and it did. Shortly after 10, the door opened without warning. Michael was there, with disheveled hair, his shirt untucked from his pants, and his face downcast. He didn't say anything immediately. He just entered and closed the door behind him. Emily turned, surprised. "What are you doing here?" The reply came with a tired look and a low but firm voice. "I couldn't let you go." Emily fell silent, waiting for more. Michael ran his hands through his face nervously. "I lied when I said I wanted to keep everything professional. I lied when I pretended not to care about you. I'm afraid, because you came without warning, and you changed everything, and now I don't know what it's like to live without you close by." Emily felt her eyes filling with tears, but she said nothing. He continued, "I always sabotage myself, with everything, and with you, I did it again. Because it was easier to pretend not to feel than to face the idea of losing you. But I've already lost, and I can't allow that to happen." He took a deep breath, as if finally releasing a weight he had carried for days. "I want to try. Emily, without masks, without contracts, without fear. I want you here with me, because from the day you spilled coffee on my jacket, I was never the same." It was then that Emily spoke. "You hurt me. When you snooped into my life, when you omitted what was about your grandmother, when you pretended not to feel anything." Michael nodded. "I know, and I'm here to ask for your forgiveness, not as a boss, as a man, as someone who fell in love with you and didn't have the courage to admit it." The silence that followed was not empty, it was full, dense, and it was in that silence that Emily finally took a step forward. She did not answer with words. She simply hugged him, tight, like someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and at last finds refuge. Michael wrapped his arm around her, holding her gently, as if he were afraid of breaking her. They remained like that for a few seconds, feeling each other's breath. And then the kiss came, unhurried, unpracticed, like everything between them, genuine. It was as if the world suddenly made sense, as if all the missteps had led exactly to that moment. There were no more doubts, no fear. That night, finally, the two strangers brought together by chance ceased to be strangers and became something that neither could quite name, but both felt a beginning, perhaps, or simply the continuation of something that had been written long before they realized. A few months passed since that night. Much had changed, and at the same time, some things remained exactly as they should be. Emily continued living at the mansion during the week, now without the previous formality. She was part of the house, part of the routine, of the family. Her relationship with Catherine grew even more. They shared laughter, memories, and even a few card games at the end of the afternoon. Catherine was more lively, lighter. She said that the house was finally coming back to life. And for her part, Emily had rediscovered something she thought she had lost: peace. It wasn't just love, it was belonging. She no longer needed to conform to the world of the Browns, because now she was also part of it. And most importantly, with her own rules, her identity, her truth. With every small gesture from Michael, a note during coffee time, an exchange of glances during a meeting, she realized that love isn't shown with promises, but with consistency. On the night of Catherine's birthday, Emily prepared a special dinner. With the help of the Dij, Employees, she decorated the garden with hanging lights in the trees, set the table with flowers, and chose each dish with care. Catherine appeared wearing an elegant burgundy dress and some antique earrings, smiling as if she had gone back 20 years. Michael arrived a little later, wearing a dark blazer and sporting a conspiratorial expression. During the dinner, there were emotional speeches, laughter, toasts. Catherine looked at both of them with a look that said everything without words. And then Michael called for silence. He stood up, approached Emily, and with an envelope in his hand, handed over 2 train tickets to Paris. A gift for you two. The city my grandmother always dreamed of visiting, and that you mentioned during your first week here. Emily couldn't contain her smile. She was surprised, moved, grateful, but she still didn't know that the best was yet to come. When everyone thought the special moment had passed, Michael knelt right there under the garden. Lights. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring, the kind that suits someone who values what is true. Emily Smith, will you continue writing this story with me? The reaction was a mixture of astonishment and nervous laughter. Catherine exclaimed, "It was about time," which made everyone laugh. Emily looked him in the eyes and replied, without hesitation, "Yes." Amid discreet applause, tight hugs, a soft and meaningful kiss, the moment was sealed. That night, sitting side by side in the garden, watching the clear sky after the storm, she thought about everything they had experienced, about the spilled coffee, the packed suitcase, the difficult decisions. And she understood, once and for all, that sometimes life changes not when everything goes right, but when one has the courage to stay, even when everything seems messy, because some stories begin by chance, but become eternal in the decision to continue. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future content. Goodbye.